So today kicked off the all-digital event with Develop Brighton. This was originally planned to be an industry-focused event where main developers from all over came to share insights or just talk about developing games or software. And there's some awards they hand out with this. Of course, the event had to be moved to an all-digital event, and it was actually kind of weird in that you had to sign up ahead of time to watch the stream, as they were calling it. In reality, it was just an unlisted YouTube video of some of the panels, and although technically that unlisted video link was only sent to those who signed up, it quickly got spread a lot further and now seems to be public for everyone. But fortunately, one of the people getting an award and actually giving a keynote during Develop Brighton this year was Todd Howard. And during his hour or so long interview, he gives us pretty interesting insights into Fallout 76, into Starfield, and some of the engine upgrades that'll even continue into the Elder Scrolls 6. There's actually a lot of pretty interesting quotes to take away from this one. It'll without a doubt be another one of those interviews that people are referencing back to, probably me, in months and even years to come, depending on how far away Starfield is, and he even talks somewhat about how far away the game could be. So if you guys enjoy the content, you can get subscribed. I'm definitely going to continue to keep you up to date with all of the Bethesda and Fallout Starfield news, or even some Elder Scrolls news if that ever comes. But right off the bat, one of the first things Todd Howard talks about during this is how the Bethesda we know today really started with Morrowind. And this kicks off an interesting conversation, as with Morrowind, Bethesda had a transition from a more procedurally generated world in previous Elder Scrolls titles to a more handcrafted one in Morrowind, and really from Morrowind forward. Current Bethesda games, and really just with the engine tools overall, there is some procedural generation, particularly with foliage, but even other things like Radiant Quest to a degree. But it seems like we're getting quite a bit more procedural generation in the future.
So we went away for a while, and then we've been coming back to it over time. That we like to experiment each game with somewhat procedural stuff, and then where it's not working out, we go in and touch it. And the stuff we're doing now, we're pushing procedural generation further than we have in a very, very long time with the stuff that's coming up.
So that's a very interesting statement, and there's actually quite a bit to unpack with it. Bethesda leaning on or relying on procedural generation more so, or at least using more advanced procedural generations in future titles. And although I could already see people taking this out of context, thinking it means things like procedurally generated planets in Starfield, this entire procedural generation conversation in the post-Morrowind era was more so describing it as a selective tool that could do one specific thing, like foliage in past games. I imagine what they're talking about here is that tool is going to get a bit more advanced, or going to do some more things in future games, but I don't think we're talking about anything like No Man's Sky with entire planets being procedurally generated. Todd Howard really reinforces that handcrafted aspect of their worlds here, and if I was to speculate, I would imagine some aspects of planets or planetary travel in Starfield, which technically isn't confirmed, but come on, it's a space game, we're probably going to go to at least one other planet, will feature some degree of procedural generation. It seems like one of the obvious forms this would come in. But some of the major things like towns, cities, or even notable environments will be handcrafted.
We want to make sure for the scale of our development and our team that we're touching the things that are most important, and if we can use procedural systems to generate content that keep the game kind of everlasting, then that's what we want to lean on.
Or even something like NPCs or dialogue of NPCs, how reactive they are towards you, and having certain lines be automatically generated. On a related note, they talk quite a bit about the engine here. We've heard how Starfield's engine is getting quite significant upgrades, but it seems even more significant than we originally thought.
Well, we refresh it with every game. We too will acknowledge it needs more work than it has in previous times, and we do that between generations, and we've been doing it. I can say that the engine work we started a while ago. I didn't want to say. Oh my God. It's been a while. We have more people doing engine work now by a factor of 5, probably than we've ever had. So the overhaul in our engine is the largest we've probably ever had. Maybe, larger than Morrowind to Oblivion.
So I found that quote to be very interesting, but I think a lot of context can be added by some other knowledge of Bethesda events. During the development of Fallout 4, Bethesda Game Studios had around 100 developers, but now it seems like they have roughly 400 or even perhaps a bit more. In the years between Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, they underwent massive expansion, literally quadrupling in size. Despite that, Pete Hines and even others from Bethesda have remained adamant games aren't going to be coming out quicker. So there's been kind of this mystery of like, like, okay, you quadrupled in size, but you're not releasing games quicker. What are all these people doing? Better games is the obvious answer, but specifically here, I think it means a updated or much better engine. We've heard in the past how animation changes are coming. In this interview, Todd Howard expands that to rendering changes, animation changes, procedural generation changes, and pathing changes. So I wouldn't be shocked if that first moment we really see Starfield's new engine in action, like with some gameplay, not just a couple of leaked images, is actually quite jarring for many of us who have been playing and enjoying these games, because it really sounds like this is going to be huge. And even just how he remarks about how long they've been working on it. Following the release of Fallout 4, there was kind of a splitting off point. There's work beginning on Fallout 76, but also work beginning on Starfield. I wouldn't be shocked if a lot of this heavy lifting on engine upgrades actually began after Fallout 4's DLC. Another pretty interesting answer that perhaps could provide some context, but also could be a throwaway, is the question of what would be different, or what could you do with Skyrim? Perhaps what cut features could be added in if it was created for next-gen hardware? Todd Howard even remarks that's kind of a trick question. It's kind of asking, what's the Elder Scrolls 6 going to feature that's new and improved?
Probably just the amount of NPCs, and there obviously you get the fidelity, right? So the graphics will be better, but whatever. The amount of NPCs and the feeling of the other people in Skyrim and how they react to you. The cities are in your mind, like you've been to Whiterun and that's this big city, but it's not. And maybe there's 20 people walking around total. So that's probably the main thing, where the hardware and those kind of things get you.
And even just the way he referred to cities there, I almost feel like he's thinking about what cities in Starfield look like, how dense they likely are, how many people are actually walking around, and thinking back to Skyrim where it's like, oh, yeah, there's like barely anyone there. But I think taking that answer together along with some of the other information we have is interesting, because even later in this interview, when talking about what improvements could come from hardware, Todd Howard actually cites NPCs and reactivity, and again, how many people are around you. And taking all of these interviews together, and even statements like the engine updates including animation, pathing, and procedural generation, really confirms that the way other NPCs react or act around you will be significantly updated or overhauled. Because when you really think about it, if you take an NPC from Skyrim and compare it to an NPC in Fallout 76, there's actually kind of a downgrade, because Fallout 76 multiplayer, there's additional restrictions, but comparing it to Fallout 4, there's really not a huge upgrade there. The NPCs in these games have been roughly the same for about a decade now, and I would definitely bet on that being one of the massive upgrades we see with whatever comes for Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6. One of the big concerns I've had as far as engine upgrades is actually the moddability of the engine. Now, it'd be pretty stupid for Bethesda to hurt the modding scene, considering how much it has helped their games in the past. Unfortunately here, when talking about these big engine overhauls, Todd Howard actually says there are certain things they didn't want to change, and that was modding.
There are things we do that we still like, the way we build our worlds, the way people can mod it. These are things I think that are fundamentally good about our tech stack.
So it does, at least to me, feel like a bit of reassurance that modding isn't going anywhere, and I don't think it's going to be cut down in a major way. As far as the next gen and hardware goes, though, we also got some interesting insights and answers around this. Throughout this interview, they talked quite a bit about those wow moments some of the Bethesda games have had. I'm sure many of us remember that first time playing Fallout 3 and exiting the vault into the world, and really just being able to do whatever you wanted. And here Todd expands on how graphics and fidelity can really create some of those powerful wow moments, and that he thinks they can actually create those moments in new ways with this next-gen hardware, and moving on to the next-gen with the updated engine. He doesn't really expand on how, but I could imagine a hypothetical Starfield moment with the updated and improved graphics. Perhaps you kind of step out into space for the first time, and it's not just you could go anywhere on this planet, you could go anywhere in any of these planets. Pure speculation, but that could be a pretty crazy wow moment they have on the horizon. But he also reiterates a point we keep hearing about many times from him in interviews as of late, where the next generation is about accessibility. You have features like quick resume on Xbox, and how the next 5 to 10 years specifically will really focus on accessibility, bring these games to people wherever they are, or perhaps if they don't have the technology or hardware to actually run certain games or at a certain fidelity. So all of that has been very positive thus far, but a couple of things that point in perhaps a not as positive direction, but we don't really know. When all that talk about engine upgrades was going on, Todd Howard says this:
it's a significant overhaul. It's taken us longer than we would have liked.
Which to me was actually a pretty interesting quote, that the engine upgrades they are doing, as massive as they are, actually ended up taking longer than perhaps they expected, or just perhaps as long as they wanted them to. But then even a bit later in the interview, the interviewer does ask more directly, when can we expect to hear more about Starfield? And I found this answer to be very interesting.
I can't answer. I honestly cannot answer that right now.
I know, but I had to ask.
No, that's fair to ask. Look, it's going to be a while till people hear about it and really, really see it.
So now perhaps this is just looking way too deeply into what Todd Howard's saying here, but to me, the way he says he honestly can't answer that question does somewhat speak to perhaps they just don't know. And when you take it all together, one, we just heard how the engine overhaul is taking longer than they would like it to. Then we get this answer as far as when a next reveal or bigger trailer could be. But then even after this, he actually has a few interesting quotes, kind of weighing the pros and cons of earlier reveals versus later reveals like they tend to do. And even does say he doesn't want to string people along.
But then you worry about showing some things and then people get really excited. They're like, then the next question is, when's it coming out? And you're like, well, just wait. Or then it gets delayed. I just don't want to string them along too long. You get kind of fatigued. So you have to balance that fatigue of wanting something versus, consumer excitement, I think, more than anything. Also, it takes time, to be frank. Preparing trailers and demos and assets, they take time away from development.
And again, perhaps this is just all reading way too deeply into it, but to me, it definitely feels like there's some potential that this game could not come in 2021. I think the consensus right now has been a E3 2021 reveal and then a November release date, like they've been doing for the past few years now. But when you take into consideration some of the factors at play here, the engine taking longer than expected, them all being forced remote due to the pandemic, the mass expansion at Bethesda, which likely had some growing pains, they went from one office of 100 people to 4 offices of 400 people, spread all across the country, or really the continent of North America. Maybe Bethesda just doesn't know if it'll actually be done in time for 2021. It still is a while away, another year of development. And of course, some of the other interesting intangibles, E3 is probably not happening next year. I don't think there'll be a massive in-person event again, so that could definitely affect how Bethesda has a big conference or a big reveal. Maybe Bethesda is really debating whether or not to have a earlier reveal for this game, maybe a year-long media cycle or push compared to the typical 5 or so month one they have. And even further, you of course have the whole Xbox acquisition that could come into play, but technically they're not owned yet, so they don't know exactly how it'll come into play. At the same time, perhaps I'm just reading way too deeply into this. Could just be as simple as there's no E3, or they don't think there's going to be E3, so they're trying to decide how to do this new event. But for me at least, it definitely has given me more doubt around a 2021 release date than anything we've heard previously. But then we also hear a bit about Fallout 76. We've heard many times now how Fallout 76 really started as almost a multiplayer mode for Fallout 4, but that wasn't really something they wanted to pursue, so it ended up later becoming a full spin-off game. But he also talks about how some survival elements were considered for this, and even Fallout 76 changed a lot during its development.
Geez, what wasn't a challenge on that game? And we were playing a lot of survival games at the time. DayZ was popular, some other things, and we said, oh, this would feel really good as a, obviously Fallout's a survival game. Let's make a prequel. So it kind of started as a side project. It's a project that changed a lot while we were making it, so we asked all of those questions.
I find this interesting because it makes you wonder, what were some of those other renditions? We had that leak a long time ago about how Fallout 76 was a Rust clone. That was actually one of the first leaks we ever got on the game, dating all the way back to 2017. And based off the most recent statements by Todd here, it seems like they probably really did just have a DayZ or Rust clone to a certain degree with Fallout 76 and one of the earlier builds. It definitely makes me wonder what that game could have played like compared to what we got on release. Even further, we hear how some of the story and quests didn't actually get implemented into this game until a bit later in development, at least compared to other projects. They quickly realized those survival elements weren't really landing with the audience though. And Todd describes here, on launch day, they kind of realized what they delivered on day one was a letdown, and over time how it has drifted more towards a classic Fallout game, but how Fallout 76 right now is in a good place. Which, somewhat building off that, he mentions how one of the big things to make a difference with Fallout 76 was, despite the criticism and a lot of the issues it launched with, it still got a lot of people playing.
We were fortunate. I would say the main thing that made the difference is, despite the issues and the very well-deserved criticism we got, there were a lot of people playing it. There were a lot of people who said, obviously not the scale of a regular Fallout we would do, like a 3 or a 4, but a lot of people, millions of people who said, I actually want this. I want it to be good. And that community, so no, there is something here. Let's keep at it. And we also felt, look, we had let everybody down. And it is I think the only thing to do in that case is to find a way. You're not erasing that moment, but you're making it right for the people who that is what they wanted.
And further, how they wanted to try something different with the game, but the audience didn't like that and did a bad job at saying how different the game was going to be. One of the funny things looking back is if you actually take a look at the original teaser, at no point does it indicate it's not going to be a single player Fallout, which to me still seems like a very bizarre or questionable marketing choice. One interesting thing to note with Fallout 76 that hasn't come is a next-gen upgraded version. It doesn't necessarily say much about the success of the game, but considering the Elder Scrolls Online is getting a next-gen version, it was kind of surprising that Fallout wasn't. Now, without a doubt, could be on the way. You do kind of hope it's on the way. It definitely seems like Fallout 76 will be the only Fallout game we have for at least the next few years, probably longer. But either way, as far as the future of Bethesda and multiplayer titles, Todd Howard here has what I would describe as a pretty telling answer.
I mean, you don't want to say never. I think the one, the one thing that we would do differently is put it out there 24/7 live before we're really charging people, full price game to play. You really have to beta test these things for a long period of time, 24/7.
So to me, it is even more confirmation that Starfield specifically is going to be a purely single player game. I still think it'd be kind of cool if it had co-op, but all the quotes here taken together make it seem like it's not really going to be that type of experience. And then one of the final things to touch on is the Microsoft acquisition. We didn't get a ton of quotes, just a few questions towards the end on this one. It is important to remember that technically Microsoft does not own ZeniMax or Bethesda yet. The deal still has to get approved, so they can't just start acting like Microsoft owns them. That would be illegal. But he has some interesting quotes on this also, and perhaps what changes we could see to Bethesda as a result of this.
I think maybe a shock to a lot of people, but it's more natural than you might think internally, particularly for my group, our games. Every game I've done, we've done, Morrowind helped us a lot, and then Oblivion and Skyrim and Fallouts. Every game I've done, there's been some co-development and publishing arrangement that we've had. Better games, the best games, and reach even more people. And that's what's, at the end of the day, most important to us.
Overall, I really like this interview. It wasn't like we got a ton of concrete or obvious confirmed details, but I think some of the talk on procedural generation and the engine overall are interesting. I think we're going to see some big changes with Starfield, but it also makes it seem like it might be a bit farther away than some of us initially anticipated, or at least that's one of my takeaways from this. Either way, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you found it a bit informative. Until next time, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all later.